So far we're on time.
Thank you.
That's a hint.
Yes, I will do my best. Now, what I'm going to talk about is sort of the development of the UK Biobank access process and where we are now seen from the point of view of the EGC. I'm not speaking for the EGC, this is sort of my personal take on it. And I think the basic parameters for the EGC is that the UK Biobank is a pure resource. It's not owned or controlled by any particular group of researchers. There are no rights to exclusive use, and the access requirements are and should be equal for all. It shouldn't matter whether you're from the UK or abroad. It shouldn't matter what UK university you come from. And then, of course, the Ethics and Governance Council is bound, as is UK Biobank, by the Ethics and Governance Framework, which has already been mentioned perhaps more times than you would like to hear. UK Biobank will serve as a steward of the resource, maintaining and building it for the public good in accordance with its purpose. And of relevance to access, the Ethics and Governance Council will keep use of the resource under review in order to advise on conformance with this framework and the IP and access policy, and to assure itself and others that the resource is being used in the public interest. So essentially, there are sort of two things here. There's the conformance issue, and there's the use in the public interest. This has already been mentioned by both other speakers, that essentially in the UK Biobank situation, there are two depletable resources. The first is the goodwill of the participants, and that might be depleted in two ways. It might be depleted if UK Biobank does something that the participants do not like or do not communicate with participants in ways that participants would like, and more specifically in relation to recontact. And the Ethics and Governance Framework already recognized the second point, that recontact is a special case. So this is the one place where the Ethics and Governance Framework requires UK Biobank to seek advice from the Ethics and Governance Council. And then, of course, the other depletable resource are the samples that are held. Now, my historical slide here is that I think that there were three stages in the development in history. First of all, before access could take place, there had to be a development of an access policy, and UK Biobank had drafted an access policy. The EGC had comments on it. UK Biobank redrafted an access policy, and eventually an access policy that I think is workable, and sort of Jonathan has explained the mechanics of it, was put in place. But just because there is a policy that's sensible, it's not clear that that policy is going to work. So one of the things that has been of great importance to the Ethics and Governance Council was to see how this process actually worked in practice. Did it pick up on ethical issues? Was there a robust way of looking at the public interest, and so on? So we've had a phase where the Ethics and Governance Council has been sort of very interested in the details of how this actually worked, what decisions were made by whom at some point, and at what point. I think this is one of the places where it's been very important that the Ethics and Governance Council concentrates on UK Biobank, that it's a UK Biobank related thing, because it has enabled us to get a very detailed view, not only of sort of the process as it is on the flowchart, but how it works in detail, and also to well, come to trust the people who actually do this. And that has then made it possible to move on to a phase that we have just finished, which is sort of how should the Ethics and Governance Council discharge this obligation to review the use of UK Biobank. I think that there are three separate issues here that are in play, and each could fit with many possible models. There's an issue about the mere fact that a single project could be not in conformance with the EGF, the original consent, or UK Biobank policies. UK Biobank in the EGF promises a very robust anonymity to participants. We have already here mentioned the incoming UK EU directive for regulation, but the UK Biobank actually promises something which is very close to what we're worried about the EU implementing, because it promises in the EGF that researchers will not be able to identify from data or samples. That's quite strong. So a project might make it possible for researchers to identify. Then the second issue is the issue of whether use is or is not in the public interest. And that's, I think, is primarily an issue of aggregation over the whole set of projects, and not so much about each individual project. It's a question about whether the whole set of projects can be said to be in the public interest. And it's somewhat akin to the question about sort of, is animal research, does it have benefits or not? Well, there might well, which is again an aggregative issue over the set of animal research projects taking place. And then the final issue is that the access process needs to be accountable and transparent. And this leads then to the main issues in designing a model for ongoing ethics and governance oversight. Well, first of all, the EC has to have confidence in the robustness of Biobank's internal ethical governance. There has to be transparency of the access process to the EGC, but also wider transparency. And of course, whatever access process and whatever oversight there is has to be easy to operate without imposing any undue burden on UK Biobank or its users. So based on this, and I think to a large extent based on the EGC coming to the view that sort of the UK Biobank's internal ethical governance is sufficiently robust, we've reached an agreed model for oversight of access. Under this model, UK Biobank has an obligation to alert the EGC to applications that raise significant ethics or governance issues. Of course, this is a point that very much relies on trust in both the process and the persons, because this can only work if the EGC believes that UK Biobank can identify those projects that raise significant ethics or governance issues. The UK Biobank will quarterly report on applications and whether they have been approved or not, and there will be regular external audit of the access process. Now, there are a number of issues that have already been raised. Jonathan mentioned them. There's the issue of what we will call that arises in the future, issues of indirect feedback, that if you're recontacted, will that, in a specific case, will that sort of tell you what your sort of condition is so that you're at risk for something. And I think here that there's an issue which goes to other sessions of this. Exactly what is it that UK Biobank has promised people to do or not to do in relation to feedback. And then there's, and this issue arises in relation to anonymity and linkage, that if UK Biobank links to outside research projects and provides them data, well, that data, insofar as it is linked to persons in these other biobanks and these other researchers have access, at least prima facie seems to be in conflict with this very strong notion of researchers will not be able to identify. Now, of course, we might all believe that bona fide researchers in other large UK studies will not re-identify. So we might have trust in the researchers, but that's a slightly different issue. What about the future? Well, this, I think, nicely links into the next session as well, because the EGF says that a detailed access policy for use of the resource will be developed with guidance from the Ethics and Governance Council, which has happened. And then it says, which will involve in response to users, participants, and the wider public. So there is a requirement here that the development of the access policy not only responds to the users, but also to the participants in the wider public, and that seems to require UK Biobank actually to communicate quite actively with all the stakeholder groups about the access policy. Thank you.